Let me just mute all. Oops. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Tonight we're going to talk about the tragic death of George Floyd, the Jewish response. You know, we were all horrified by his death, the tragic death by Eric Chauvin. You know, in Jewish law, even if someone murders, first-degree murder, if you murder someone in cold blood, we're not allowed to kill that person. There's no vigilantism. You must take him to court. We're a society, we're a civilized society. And if someone would kill this murderer, he would be convicted for murder. That would be a crime. You know, we have law and order. You have to bring the person to trial. If someone were to murder Derek Chauvin, he would be tried and convicted for murder. We are a civilized society governed by law and order. But whenever we hear of a tragedy that's so morally repulsive, there's a superficial way to deal with it, and then there's the Torah way to deal with it. The Torah, the superficial way to deal with it is to be outraged. How dare that bum, how can he do something so horrible? We wag our finger, we pound our chest, and we feel so self-righteous, filled with righteous indignation. And by comparison, we feel like a saint. But that's a very, very immature approach. And it doesn't lead to any change, any real change. It's a very cheap, synthetic sense of righteousness, like cheap perfume. It doesn't cost anything, it doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't cover up on the ugliness inside. Yes, you walk away with a holier-than-thou attitude, with an insufferable arrogance and haughtiness that turns off and repulses everyone around you to you and to your message. You know, on Yom Kippur, our Day of Atonement, we don't get up and confess other people's sins. We focus on our personal failures and shortcomings. Criticisms of others doesn't change anybody. No one could hear what's wrong with themselves. Everyone could hear what's wrong with you. When we share something that's real inside of us, we can listen and we can hear, and then we can be inspired to change. The correct way, the Torah way, how do we learn from this experience? You know, the fact that 99.9% of us would never even dream to do what David Chavez did to George Floyd, does that make us righteous or good? No, we're not even tempted to. The fact that we don't rape and murder, does that make us upright citizens? It's not a fair comparison. You have to compare apples to apples, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya in the first part, chapter 30. If you want to relate to this person, to this incident, we have to look at our own struggles. Here we are, we're angry, we're upset, and we demand and fully expect that despite this inner demons, that this huge struggle that we can't even relate to, that Derek Chauvin had, he should have been able to overcome his overwhelming desire to cruelly and mercilessly choke George Floyd to death, despite his desperate pleas that he's choking. And we're angry. Why didn't you do the right thing? So the honest question we have to ask ourselves, every one of us has to ask ourselves, is how are we doing in those areas in our life that we have to struggle? Let's compare apples to apples. We know how difficult it is to change. We know how difficult it is to lose a single pound when we desperately want to. And yet we can't make a dent. No movement, no change. We have to look at the areas in our life No, cruelty takes many forms. Embarrassing a person in public is cruelty. Being cruel and insensitive to your spouse, to your children, to your parents, to your co-workers, to your fellow shul members. You know, when you start comparing apples to apples, we look at our own personal struggles, where it comes to kindness or cruelty, insensitivity. Then we get off our high horse, we lose our insufferable arrogance, and we're humble. Because we know how difficult it is to do the right thing. And now we can begin to relate to the struggle of that would-be murderer or rapist. We expect him to overcome his overwhelming desire that we can't even relate to. And he should do the right thing. Do we do the right thing when we have to struggle? The areas in our life that we have to struggle? And when we don't struggle, there's no area in our life that we are struggling and we don't overcome, then who's the bum and who's the lowlife? It's surely us. Because we are educated, we know better. And still, we can't lift ourselves up above our nature and our tendencies. And we can't do the right thing. This is what should motivate us to change from within. And when we change from within, this is how we inspire others to change, and this is how we change the world. Then we walk away from this experience with something real, a real change, an inner change. But Jews always look to the Torah, to answers. We Jews have an answer to the chaos and confusion that has engulfed our beloved city and country. And it's high time that we Jews share our secret with the world. There's a beautiful story with Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Chabad of the great Hasidic master. It was the day before Pesach, and he calls in his Hasidim and he said, I want you to fill my home with smuggled goods. He says, Rebbe, this is Tsarist Russia. You know what happens if you're caught smuggling? You're hanged in the public square. The Rebbe says, I don't care. I want my house filled with smuggled goods. Within an hour, the Rebbe's house was filled with anything you can imagine. And the Rebbe turned to his Hasidim and he says, now I want you to bring me a piece of bread. He says, Rebbe, it's before Pesach. We just finished cleaning our homes. We just checked for chametz last night. We burned the chametz. Rebbe says, I don't care. I want a piece of bread. The Hasidim spread out throughout the city of Bardichev. An hour goes by, 2 hours, 3 hours. They all come back empty-handed. He says, Rebbe, we looked in every nook and cranny. We couldn't find a single crumb of bread. And the Rebbe looked up with tears in his eyes. And he says, Hashem, look, here you have a czar. He has soldiers. He hangs people. He said you don't smuggle, and the boundaries, the borders are porous. Within an hour, I was able to fill up my house and everything illegal you can imagine. I asked for a slice of bread. You wrote in your Torah, thou shalt not have chametz. We haven't seen your God in 1700 years since the destruction of the temple. This was back then, 200 years ago. You don't have police. You don't have guards. And you can't find a single crumb of bread full of partition. You know, we Jews always place supreme value on education. And we always knew the primary goal of education is to educate our children to be civilized human beings. It's not how brilliant they are. The Nazis were brilliant. They knew how to make a gas that's most efficient in the world. That's not education. Education is teaching our children to be and behave and act like civilized human beings, to check their impulses, to be able to overcome their urges and natural instincts, and to do the right thing. And what is the foundation of all foundations, as Maimonides starts out his magnum opus. And the pillar of all pillars is the knowledge of Hashem. That is the foundation of education. To know that there's an eye that sees, there's an ear that hears. Hashem says, you cannot hide in this dark of the night. I see everything and I know everything. And why don't we murder? Because Hashem said, God says, thou shalt not murder. Why don't we steal? Because God said, thou shalt not steal. Why don't we harm another human being? Because God said, thou shalt not harm another human being. The Talmud tells us, why did God create all mankind? We all come from man, from one single man. The animals were created in pairs, yet man was created single, alone. To teach us that all men are equal. So no man can claim, I am superior, I am inferior. There's no difference if you're white, if you're black, if you're red, if you're yellow. Every human being is created in the image of God. We are all one. What unites us is the highest common denominator. Every human being alive today is a child of Noah. Noah was like Adam. He single-handedly saved the world, rescued the world, because he and his family courageously, despite the fact the world was hopelessly immoral and corrupt, followed the 7 Noahide laws. He is the role model for all 8 billion people on earth today. Every human being is created in the image of God, and we expect the highest standards for all human beings without any exception. Dumbing down to the lowest common denominator is reverse racism. You often hear comments such as, well, what else do you expect from blacks? That is so insulting. That is so condescending. We expect every human being equally to live up to Hashem's standards and code of honor and code of behavior, the 7 Noahide laws, without a single exception. During the early 20th century, there was hardly any crime in America. Speak to people who are old enough, they remember when they used to sleep with their doors open. During the Depression, when there was real hunger. Thank God today we don't know what real hunger means. But then there was real hunger. People slept with their doors open. There was no inner city crime. The black community was very, very spiritual and very religious. There was prayer in the schools. People said grace after the meal. People went to bed with a prayer. But since 1962, when God was expelled from the public schools and from the public square, crime shot up thousands of percentage points. What happened to George Floyd was a tragedy. But what happened in its aftermath is just as great as a tragedy. I don't care how angry you are. There's nothing in the world that justifies a single crime. We are witnessing the complete disintegration of civilized society. Now we're hearing calls to defund and dismantle the police. The only thing we have to defund are the schools. An educational system that could produce a David Chauvin who could mercilessly and cold-bloodedly choke a person to death close to 9 minutes, who's pleading for his life. That school system, that educational system has failed miserably. An educational system that could produce those who murder, loot, destroy, and create anarchy, and destroy people's livelihoods, throw bricks at people, has miserably failed in its mission. An educational system that could produce our feckless leaders with no spine or backbone, who didn't have the courage to nip the riots in the bud with the first criminal activity by arresting the first criminal and the second criminal and the third criminal and holding them in prison and not freeing them within a few hours. This educational system has failed. The only excuse for democracy, why an individual agrees to give up his personal rights, his God-given rights, is only because government promises to keep them safe. A government that shirks its primary responsibility to keep their citizens and their businesses safe is not a government, but a mafia with guns. Law-abiding citizens were told by their government, were under curfew. They were imprisoned in their houses while the mob rioted without a single policeman in sight, destroying their livelihood. What's the most shocking thing of all, and the failure of our educational system, is the silence of the silent majority, who remain silent, who allow themselves to be intimidated by these terrorists, and worse, these intellectual terrorists, who rationalize, excuse this criminal behavior. The Torah teaches us you have to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. In America, innocent until proven guilty. How dare you call millions of people racist? I don't know a single person who wasn't horrified by the death of George Floyd. I don't know anyone who knows a single person. Do you know anyone who knows anyone who wasn't horrified by what happened? There are 900,000 police officers in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of them are black. It's safe to say that 99% of them were horrified by what happened to George Floyd. How dare you accuse these decent, hard-working people who risk their life every day for us as racists? This is not the Jewish way. Defund the police. It's thanks to the heroic work of these men and women who were heroically brought crying down to New York City. We're old enough to remember when you had 2,200 murders a year in New York City. And today, thanks to the work of these policemen and women, we're down to 300 murders a year. There are tens of thousands of black people who are alive today, who are walking the face of the earth, thanks to these policemen and women. Where's our gratitude? How dare we paint a brush accusing 900,000 decent people? This is so un-American, this is so un-Jewish, it's so evil. You claim Black Lives Matters? Who will suffer most from defunding the police? Dismantling the police? The black community that you claim you care about. In Chicago, in May 31st, Chicago had the worst day on record, murder record, in 24 hours. 18 people, most of them blacks, were murdered because of this defunding the police and dismantling the police. Most of the businesses that are destroyed are in these black neighborhoods. Do you hear the cry of the people? They have nowhere to shop for food. They have nowhere to buy their medicine because these stores have been looted and destroyed, and there's murder and mayhem in the streets. You care about Black Lives Matters? What about the immigrants who couldn't afford to buy insurance, who put their life savings and built their business? And because of their feckless mayors and leaders, their life dream was destroyed overnight. The thousands of businesses looted, destroyed. New York City looking like a third world country, Venezuela. Boarded up streets, Madison Avenue, Fifth Avenue. What about the dozens of people who died in the riots? There are over a dozen people who died. Does anyone talk about them? What about the police officer, black retired police officer, David Dorn in St. Louis, who was brutally murdered? What about the life of federal officer Patrick Underwood, who was brutally murdered in Oakland, California? So what is the solution to this tragic, sorry state of affairs that has left us all reeling in shock and disbelief? The total disintegration and crumbling of civilized society. And no one says a word. Everyone is too intimidated by these intellectual terrorists. You have to pinch yourself in the cheek that this is even happening. Well, the Levitch Rebbe pleaded 40, 50, 60 years ago. He said the only way to build a genuinely just society that's not based on power, but one based on morality, on truth, and on justice, where people police themselves, is to bring back to the public schools a moment of silence. Every day in the public schools should begin and be introduced by a moment of silence. It would be the parent's obligation to tell the child what to think for those 60 seconds. Jewish parents would tell their children to think, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Let the Christian and Muslim parents tell their children to pray to God in their way. If you're an atheist, tell your child to think about being a kind, decent, and respectful human being. But we must impress in our 60 million children that there's something far more important than math, science, physics, and it must precede it. And that is the knowledge and awareness of something greater than all of us put together, a higher power and a higher being, an eye that sees and an ear that hears. The reason we don't commit a crime is not because we're not clever enough to get away with it, but because it's wrong, because God said so. This is what America desperately needs today. This is the greatest gift that we Jews can give to America in its time of need, when it stands at a crossroad, whether we go the way of Venezuela or we live up to our greatness that Hashem entrusted us with. If we have an internal code of right and wrong, if our children were given an internal code of right and wrong, then we wouldn't need so many police. And the police themselves would also be more moral and ethical. Do you know that in the shtetl there was no violent crime? In Yiddish there's an expression. A fish stinkt vom Kopf. A fish that stinks from the head. The ones to blame are the intellectual terrorists, the real intelligentsia supremacists who have hijacked the conversation and hijacked this country. And it's time for good people to speak up and to insist that we change our educational system. We have to raise children who have a moral compass, who know right from wrong, who know that there's a God in this world, who know that there's a divine mission, who know that there's self-respect and there's respect of others. You don't throw bricks at people, and you don't loot, and you don't smash, and you don't steal, and you don't murder, and you don't choke someone who's pleading for his life. Anyway, I'm just, I hope you don't mind, I'm just being very emotional about this because it's so shocking. I just can't believe what's happening, and I can't believe the conversation, defunding the police, dismantling the police. This is the conversation. This is the conversation that we're having now. This is what this is all about. Completely clueless, rudderless. And by the way, like everything else, every time you don't have to agree with anything I say. And if we disagree, we'll still remain friends, as long as we can talk to each other. That's another thing. People, if you don't agree with anyone today, they immediately fire you. People are fired today. Anyone who goes against the politically correct, this nonsense, he's terrorized, loses his job. I mean, it's just incredible. It's just hard to believe what we're witnessing. If someone would have told me this is even possible in the United States of America in 2020, you would have said it's impossible. They have let the inmates loose. And they're running the show now. They're running the country. No one says a word. No one responds. Everyone just accepts the most radical nonsense, dangerous nonsense. And everyone is just quiet and silent. And I don't understand that silence. It's shocking. Maybe there should be a protest of law-abiding citizens, of millions and millions, a silent majority. It should be a huge protest of law-abiding citizens for law and order and for right and wrong and for morality and for truth and for godliness and for little humility and for little emes. There should be millions of people in the street demanding a moment of silence in the schools. What kind of education are we giving our children? I'm going to unmute you if anyone would like to join the conversation. Give me a second. Okay, if you want to unmute yourself, you could.
Oh, right, we got it. Rabbi, I'll just say thank you. I completely agree with what you're saying. And it's good to hear somebody with moral clarity, because it has really been an absurd time. And people that think the way you're saying it, people like me, we're silenced. We're almost silenced, and it's very, very unfortunate. Not everywhere. I mean, some of the television stations have very good commentators like Shelby Steele and some others, you know, they're Black people who have said that their community has to raise themselves up the way they did actually before the civil rights movement. And it's been very, very interesting to hear that. But I really appreciate your speaking on this. So I just want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna. Don't be shy if you agree or you don't agree, whatever.
So there's one thing I'd like to say.
Yes.
Of the many things I'd like to say. I certainly agree with much of what you said, but I do disagree with some. One of the things that I'd like to say is that you mentioned prayer in the schools as though that will solve all our problems. I was one of the children in school, PS 28 in the Bronx, who said the prayer every day in school. And while we children were saying the prayer, I believe it was Psalm 23. Black people in the South were not allowed to drink from the same water fountain as white people. So we could say prayers in the schools, but if there's incredible injustice laden upon another people, not only did they have to drink from the segregated water fountain, they were segregated from riding on buses the same way white people, and a lot of them were hanged by the Ku Klux Klan. So there's more to the picture than just, let's say, a prayer in the schools. We have to have justice outside as well as prayer in the schools. And I happen to be in agreement with you, Rabbi, that I think I would like to see prayer in the school. It would be very nice. Or at least an hour or 5 minutes of meditation for people who might not want to say prayer. But 5 minutes of silence and introspection and conscience. And that's what I have to say on that particular subject.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Howard, you want to add something to the conversation?
Howard Rosenbaum or Howard Sotah?
Both.
I agree with you, Rabbi. I could not agree with you more, and I think you as you always, you spoke and clarified it to everybody. And I think more people need to speak up. I do agree, and I think we've been watching these horrible acts every night on the news, every day in the newspaper, and it's time to care about all lives. it's a terrible act. It's terrible what happened, but I could not agree with you more. The violence, the rioting, it has nothing to do with protesting, and it's time to be responsible.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.
Rachel, you want to say something?
Rachel.
You have to unmute yourself. You have to, Rachel, you have to unmute. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I think that anytime someone has an opinion, it's important. And I also think that just being a researcher and doing what I do, that I've learned that people that I don't agree with have validity, and they're valid in their efforts to defend a particular point or perspective. I also think, well, I will say this, and as an example, my father is a racist. He's a racist. And I remember,
oh, me too.
I remember being in the car when he cut down his friend from a tree in the South. And in the South, we had one of the first loans of Sally Mae. And so everybody congregated at our house. And it was sad, but my father, admitting who my father is hurts me. But I say that to say that he has a perspective, and a lot of his perspective comes from what he lived in that time. I do like to see where people can come together, have differences, not agree, and then put a think tank together and come up with ideas and different thoughts that benefit cultures inclusively. I don't know if that's possible, but I see it happening. But that takes leadership. I don't think there's a lot of leadership. I'm disappointed in the rioting. I'm disappointed in, sometimes I'm disappointed in the Black community. And I'm in the Black community. I'm disappointed. Sometimes I'm disappointed with the white community. And I dive in most of the time with the white community. And the more we make this about race, I think the more we're going to continue to have a problem, because this is not about race. And it's going to come down to leadership. And so we, and I'll say this and then I'll stop. I remember what my mother said about voting and why she decided to vote. It really didn't have anything to do with her. It had to do with her mother voting. And she shared some perspectives I didn't have. And the more we split, conquer, and divide each other on race, color, creed, nationality, female, gender, and all these things, we're not going to come down to the bottom line. And I think that's going to be about leadership. And I think it's going to be about prayer. I think it's going to be about the noetic laws that you talked about. I think it's going to be about spirituality. I think it's going to be about Hashem. And the more we throw in these splitting of hairs until we get to the point of Hashem, leadership, it's going to continue to do what it does. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Rachel. Beautiful.
She's either she became a Jew or she is a Jew. Her mother might be Jewish, Jeffrey, right? Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Have you seen the video of this Candace Owens at all? Young Black woman?
Fox contributor.
I don't know, Fox contributor?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
She spoke the other day, and obviously I saw the video, which really was very, very touching, very similar to the young lady who just spoke. And I think she made it very clear that it's really not necessarily a racial matter right now.
Ever.
And really it's never been. I think as long as we're all going to be around, there'll be some anti-Semitism, there'll be some racism, But I do believe that 99% of this world, well, this country for sure, are good people and accepting people. When you mention that we are all quiet, I know I am one of them. I am a good friend of Howard Rosenbaum's, and basically we all speak to each other and we're all on the same side of the fence. So what are we really accomplishing other than venting to each other? I say, where are the Martin Luther Kings today? Where are people like the Rebbe today? Where are the leaders who could really speak out and possibly calm things down a little bit? Because right now I think we're headed in the wrong direction. And I would like to see more people speaking out, and like I say, more leaders speaking out on both sides. So
what leaders?
Well, that's partly the problem. That's why I say
find a leader.
Well, I think they're out there, but
let's defund the leaders. That's who I want to defund. I want to defund the government. Let them start all over from zero and let them prove what they need of my money. We can start with the UN. I'd like to defund the UN first.
Agree.
I think the state should take back that money and that property and build something decent over there.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I know we had this conversation before. My personal opinion is that I'm a big believer in what the Rebbe said about having a moment of silence. Not to say for prayer, it could be for prayer, it could be a moment of silence. But I'm a staunch believer in the separation of church and state. I still am. I feel a lot of what goes on is from the school, but basically it's the root of it is from the home. That's where I feel, but basically religion doesn't belong on the base of Knesset, it doesn't belong on the base of Midrash, it belongs in the home to teach the children. And if that's not coming from that you can't have the government and the state and religion joining together, that's very dangerous in my opinion.
So Heshi,
yes.
In normal times, the home was the place that educated their children. Parents educated their children. Unfortunately, reality is that most parents have shirked that responsibility, and kids get everything today from the school. School used to be just a place to learn to read and write. Today, they get everything from the school. So something so essential that really transcends religion or state. God is not religion. God is not state. God is. It's the foundation of everything. So unfortunately, now they're not getting it from their parents. Parents are shirking their primary responsibility to educate their own children, to teach them character and teach them to be a mensch and give them a foundation in life, a core in life. So we have no choice. That when they start the day, a moment of silence. We're not saying a Christian prayer.
I believe in that, but is that sufficient?
The women went to work.
What's that?
The women went to work, and the family fell apart. And there's no one home with your kids. I don't care, Jeffrey. I don't care if you have a woman home or a man home, but a parent has to be in the house and has to be teaching children.
Exactly. The woman is
you can't go to work. You can't come home and be stressed. You can't come home and have a million chores. You have to be with your children. You have to talk to them.
Exactly. You're right. You're right.
And you can't have kids kicking their mothers in the street like I've seen often in Manhattan.
You've seen this? Where do you hang out?
Yeah, the same places you don't. You're the same person that doesn't see dog poo in the street. Remember that?
No, I just walk fast.
Yeah.
Evan, what do you think? With the wall behind you, straight from the wall.
I'm sitting here and thinking high altitude. What you're saying is there's an upside downness to what's going on here. And in that sense, there's been a lot of upside downness going on for a while, and for arguably a couple of decades intensively. And so I'm wondering if all this upside downness is something that indicates a quicker arrival of Mashiach.
Well, it definitely, we're living through events that happen once in 100 years. When was last time the city had a curfew? It was 80 years ago. I mean, 800 years ago. I mean, we're living through one after the other. It's so historical. Hashem is shaking us all up. He's shaking up the world to its core. Like, wake up, wake up. It's time to wake up already.
Right.
I think when the power went out in
77.
In 77, and they were rampaging again. You know who?
Yeah, I remember.
And there was a curfew then also, I think.
I don't think there was a curfew that I recall, but they were looting like crazy that time
World
too.
War II.
World War II.
Rabbi, I want to say something.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it's a shame that many of the Jewish people of our generation, you know, feel that if we give the needy food stamps and free health and other things like that, that we are fulfilling our responsibility and feeling good about ourselves, and consequently, you know, it makes us feel superior. And I hope that you know, that the rabbis, especially the conservative and reform rabbis, are speaking to their congregations about their Jewish responsibilities like you are. Because I know many people, I know people who are not, you know, Chabad, or, you know, they're Orthodox, they're modern Orthodox, this and that. But more, I'm speaking to people who are, you know, not affiliated. That's the critical thing. People who claim that they're atheists or agnostic and all of that, and yet they feel great about the fact that you know, we're giving them free health care and food stamps, and we're making donations, you know, to
like Black Lives Matters.
Yeah, and it's just a shame that those atheists are not hearing, you know, the Jewish message. It's really a shame.
Thank you, Barry. Sarah, what do you say?
Question.
Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Sarah. You have to unmute yourself. Yes.
I say it's time for all of us to pack up and go to Israel. And I'm going to be the first one.
You have property there.
I am done here. I am done here. I smell a revolution in the air. I think this country is not what it was, and it's going to be something else. And I don't want to wait till it's too late. I am already making plans. It's time to leave. I think Hashem is giving us a wake-up call.
Can I have your apartment?
I've spoken to many people, and many people are agreeing with me.
You have an extra room, Sarah.
Is your name Diane?
No, it's Marlene.
Listen.
Absolutely. This is what it is. It's over.
I have a question. This is Jeff.
Yes. Who has a question? Sure, please.
This is Jeff and Kat. Can I ask a question?
Please.
Okay. Well, hi. I know it says Jeff there, but it's also me, Kat, here. I'm listening to you, which is wonderful.
Mazel tov again.
Thank you so very much. It's really wonderful. Baruch Hashem.
A baby girl, a beautiful baby girl.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. It's wonderful. We're tired, but it's wonderful. You know, and then having all this happen while being pregnant and giving birth just adds a whole other layer to what's going on, I have to tell you. But I think, as I said to the rabbi, with everything that's going on and all the craziness and all the uncertainty and all the challenges, us having a baby, which is really an answer to our prayers, does tell us that Hashem is listening. So for us, that's really significant and brings us a lot of comfort. My question I wanted to ask is, with everyone talking about what we need to do and steps we can take and where we go forward from here, I was just really wondering, is there anything concrete we should be doing as Jews? Should we say, this is what we should be doing tomorrow, something specific, or is there nothing specific? Is there something that says we should be praying for X or we should be doing X? I'm just really wondering if there's a roadmap for us to follow.
Well, that's a great question, and that's one of the first thing we discussed. That really each and every one of us should really examine in our own personal lives those areas in our life that's challenging for us, everyone on their own level. The areas in our life where we could improve in the cruelty and sensitivity in our own personal lives. If we want to change, it's very easy to tell the other person to change. Everyone is telling everyone else what to do and to change. But how about changing something within us? Maybe we could be a little more kinder, a little more gentler. Areas in our life that's tough for us and we have to overcome. And, we're all connected. If we are able to overcome the personal challenges, that will give moral strength to those who have their challenges. If we're able to overcome our challenges, maybe the would-be murderer and rapist will find the inner strength to overcome his challenge and will be able to restrain himself and do the right thing. We're all connected. Morality is called trickle-down morality. Yeah. And it's a beautiful story, and I'll conclude with this because I do have a bar mitzvah to go to. It's a beautiful story. The previous Levitch Rebbe tells the story that the father of Rabbi Chaim Brisker, great genius, his father was Rabbi Yosher Ber Soloveitchik, a rabbi in a town, and every day he would have a shiur. He would learn with the two most brilliant students, Talmudic scholars in his town. One of them was called, I forgot the names, of Chaim the Klutz, because he sat in the same bench for 40 years until he made a dent in the bench. The other one was called Rabbeinu the Hunchback, because being hunched over all these books for 40 years, he was a little hunched over. And he gave strict instructions. This hour that they studied together, he was not allowed to be disturbed no matter what, unless it was an emergency. And one time there was a situation in town, he was the rabbi, and they felt they had to disturb him, so they entered the room, and he was very upset. He felt it wasn't such an emergency. He got very upset. I told you, don't disturb my learning. We were in the middle of a deep discussion, and you came and you disturbed our whole discussion. And the people were taken aback. They were astonished. As rabbi, you're learning with the two most brilliant minds in town. What would happen if you don't learn with them? They're not going to waste their time. They can be productive and grow in their own learning, even if they're learning alone. Why did he get so upset? And he turned to them and says, you don't understand. It's called trickle-down morality. He says, when we, the three of us, are pushing our envelope, we're pushing our limits, and we're pushing ourselves to exceed ourselves. As a result, the next Jew goes to shul on Shabbos. The other Jew goes to shul once a month. The fourth Jew goes to shul on Yom Kippur. And the fifth Jew will not intermarry. You know what happens when we start slacking off? When we are not living up and pushing ourselves and demanding from ourselves and trying to exceed ourselves? The Jew went to shul once a week will now slack off also. For him it's enough to go to shul once a month. The Jew went to shul once a month, Yom Kippur is enough. The Jew went to shul Yom Kippur will stop going Yom Kippur. And the Jew who formerly did not intermarry will now intermarry. So it's called trickle-down morality. The reason why in the shtetl there was zero crime is because the leadership, the elite in the shtetl, their minds and hearts were totally immersed in Torah, in godliness, trying to better themselves. So the worst thing that happened in the shtetl was the nincompoop in the shtetl. He was completely harmless. But when the leadership in the country is completely corrupt, when it's all, the language is all about power, there's not a word about truth, there's not a word about morality, there's not a word about honesty, about integrity, kindness and decency and genuine goodness. Everything is manipulated, everything is about power, everything is completely false. This is what you end up with. Then you end up with inner city crime. It all starts from the head. A fish that stinks from the head. We have to change. If we are going to become better people, if we are going to challenge ourselves to become kinder, we'll inspire our neighbor and inspire those people who have these incredible moral challenges that we can't even relate to. We can't even relate to that challenge. Who is tempted to put his foot on the neck of a person for 9 minutes who's pleading for his life and cruelly and mercilessly and just couldn't care less? We can't even relate to that. But he has that struggle, and we expect him and demand of him to overcome that struggle and do the right thing. So we have to first and foremost demand from ourselves and our own personal struggle to push the envelope and to go beyond our comfort zone and to go beyond our own personal limits and find those areas in our life who are a little cruel, a little insensitive. And if we make that genuine change, that's how we improve society. That's how you change society. That will trickle down to every level and every layer of society. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you.
May Hashem help that this should all be resolved. Something good should come out of all this. We should reimagine the educational system. We must bring back a moment of silence. Yes, you're right. Those people who are adults, it's too late for them maybe. It's very hard for an adult to change. When you want to change a tree, you have to change the seed. You know, a mother once came to a rabbi and says, I have a very ruly 13-year-old kid. And the rabbi told her, you're 13 years too late. Because a child is like the seed. As Floyd said, after 3 years old, it's all over. The smallest scratch seed will lead to a crooked tree. Yet when they're young, you have to immediately impress upon them, before you start math, before you start science, before you start physics, astronomy, the first thing you learn is a moment of silence. Close your eyes, meditate, reflect about there's a higher power, there's a higher being, there's an eye that sees, there's an ear that hears, there's a God in this world, there's a right and there's a wrong, there's an internal sense of right or wrong, there's an internal compass. Even if I can get away with murder, I can't do it because Hashem said, thou shalt not murder. I can't throw a brick at another human being because no matter how angry I am, because God says thou shalt not hurt another human being. I can't destroy another person's business and livelihood and loot and destroy and create anarchy because Hashem said thou shalt not steal. We have to give that to our 60 million children who are being educated in our public schools. This should be the Jewish gift to America. America that was so good to us. America that was so kind to us. This is our secret. This is why we have survived for 3,800 years. It's time for us to share our secret with our 300 million plus Americans so their children can have a foundation for a good life, a moral life, a happy life, a satisfying life, a fulfilling life, and a godly life.
Amen.
Thank you. Have a wonderful one.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank
great.
you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
everyone.
Right.
Be well. Thank you.
Good night.
All
Good
right.
night, everyone. Be safe.
And Mazel
Bye-bye.
Tov.
Good night.
Right.
Barry,
Be safe.
Barry,
Yeah.
where were you this morning?
Whoops.
I'll
Gotta
tell
go.
you. Give me a phone, I'll let you know.
I missed you.
Okay. Bye, Bear.